The night of June 14, 2017, settled over Liverpool, cloaking its industrial outskirts in a shroud of darkness and indifference. Just before midnight, the silence was shattered by a distress call to emergency services. On an abandoned lot off Wyre Road in the Everton district, far from residential homes and prying eyes, a vehicle was engulfed in flames. For the on-duty fire crew, it seemed like just another call in a long line of nighttime incidents, most likely a stolen car, torched to destroy evidence. But as they neared the scene, it became clear that there was something far more sinister about this fire. The blaze shot high into the night sky, furiously consuming a small silver van. Upon arrival, the firefighters sprang into action, battling the flames with powerful jets of water. When the fire finally relented, giving way to thick, acrid smoke, the scene that emerged chilled even the most seasoned responders. In the driver's seat, twisted and melted, was what remained of a human being. The body was burned beyond recognition. The fire had spared neither flesh nor bone, reducing them to a black, charred silhouette. It was immediately clear this was no accident. A forensic team was urgently dispatched. Soon, the empty lot was lit with the blue flashes of police vehicles. Detectives from Merseyside Police cordoned off the area. Under the harsh beams of floodlights, the scene looked surreal, a scorched shell of a van in the middle of an empty field, the pungent scent of smoke and death lingering in the air, and the heavy realization that they were standing at the edge of a very dark and complex story. This wasn't just murder. The utter destruction, the attempt to erase the victim by fire, pointed to a calculated cruelty and a desperate need to eliminate all traces. It was a message. What the detectives didn't yet know was that this van was merely the tip of the iceberg, the visible end of an invisible war playing out in the city's criminal underworld. To understand why the man in the van met such a horrific end, one must dive into a world where human life is measured in kilograms and pounds sterling. At the heart of this tragedy lay a large-scale and highly profitable drug smuggling operation, transporting narcotics from sunny Spain to rainy Britain. This was no amateur endeavor, but a well-oiled machine. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. Refrigerated trucks loaded with fresh fruits and vegetables regularly crossed the border. But beneath the pallets of oranges, hidden in secret compartments, were dozens of kilograms of high-grade cannabis, compressed and vacuum-sealed. Two key players in this logistical chain were Joseph McKeever and his associate James Doyle. They had built a reputation as fixers, men who could make things happen. Their system ran like clockwork, ensuring a steady flow of product. That reliability caught the attention of Lee Knox, a major figure on Liverpool's criminal scene. Knox was part of a new generation of gangsters, more businessmen than street thug, but no less ruthless. Confident in the operation, he fronted a significant investment in the next shipment, paying nearly £500,000 in advance. On June 11, 2017, the truck carrying the cargo arrived at the port of New Haven on England's southern coast. The driver appeared calm, but something about his paperwork, or perhaps his demeanor, triggered suspicion in an experienced customs officer. A decision was made to conduct a full inspection of the vehicle. The next day, customs officials uncovered 50 kilograms of cannabis hidden in the truck's compartments. On the street, the value of that shipment approached £1 million. The driver was arrested and the load confiscated. Back in Liverpool, Lee Knox was waiting. His phone remained silent. Hours turned into days. His concern gave way to anger, and that anger hardened into cold fury. Losing that much money was a serious blow, but losing face was even worse. In his world, failures of this scale were unforgivable, and he knew someone was going to pay for it in full. The collapse of the deal became the catalyst that unraveled the carefully constructed structure of the criminal enterprise. This structure wasn't built on friendship, but rather on a volatile mix of fear, greed, and mutual business interests, each person with a clearly defined role. At the top of this shadowy pyramid stood Lee Knox. A middle-aged man with a reputation as a smart and cautious operator, he was the brain and the bankroll behind the operation. He never got his hands dirty, preferring to act through trusted intermediaries, but his word was law. His calm demeanor and businesslike manner concealed a steely will and a ruthless intolerance for failure. Just below him was Joseph McKeever, a 46-year-old man who was an essential cog in the machine. He was the logistics man, the orchestrator, ensuring the smooth transit of goods from supplier to buyer. He handled transportation, border issues, and coordination. Perhaps he saw himself more as a businessman than a gangster, underestimating the level of violence embedded in the world he operated within. His tragedy was that he was the link that held the chain together, and when the chain snapped, the full weight came crashing down on that link. Responsibility for the shipments from Spain fell to James Doyle. He was the invisible man to the Liverpool crew, overseeing cultivation, packaging, and dispatch. His distance gave an illusion of safety, but in truth, he was the source, the origin of the entire enterprise. And finally, there was the enforcement arm embodied by 36-year-old Anthony Wales. He wasn't interested in deal-making or logistics. His reputation was built on violence. Wales was the one you called when words stopped working. His physical presence and readiness for brutality served as insurance. Debts would be paid, and disobedience would be punished. This hierarchy of fear functioned smoothly in times of success. But once the system failed, it morphed into a machine for seeking out and eliminating those deemed responsible. With each passing day of silence, the tension within the group grew exponentially. The atmosphere became poisoned by paranoia. Lee Knox demanded answers, and his fury was directed squarely at Joseph McKeever, the nearest and most accessible link in the chain. McKeever in turn desperately tried to reach James Doyle, but received only vague, evasive replies. The culmination of this escalating crisis came in the form of a tense meeting at the Royal Oak pub. Around the table sat all the key players, an enraged Knox, a panicked McKeever, Doyle, who had flown in urgently from Spain, and their younger associate, Jamie Grimes. CCTV cameras coldly captured the body language, McKeever's pleading gestures as he tried to explain himself, Knox's icy, unreadable face, and Grimes's nervous fidgeting. The air practically crackled with unspoken accusations. In a desperate and slightly absurd attempt to find a solution, the group decided to visit a lawyer they knew. The plan was for the lawyer, as a neutral third party, to call customs and make inquiries. But the legal professional instantly sensed danger and flatly refused to get involved in such a suspicious matter. It was there, in the lawyer's office, that everything took a decisive turn. James Doyle, claiming he needed to use the bathroom, seized the opportunity to vanish. He slipped out through the back door, hailed a taxi, and disappeared into the city. A brief phone call to Knox, promising to sort it all out, was followed by radio silence. His phone went dead. To everyone involved, Doyle's sudden flight was as good as a confession. For Lee Knox, it confirmed guilt beyond doubt. But with the main culprit now gone, all blame, all debt, and all suspicion shifted to the one man who remained, Joseph McKeever. From that moment on, his fate was sealed. The sentence passed in Lee Knox's mind was final and beyond appeal. Joseph McKeever was no longer a partner. He was now an enemy, a debtor who had to repay what was lost no matter the cost. He received a phone call summoning him to one more meeting, supposedly to calmly talk things through. The location chosen was an unremarkable garage compound in the Kensington area, property of Jamie Grimes. McKeever likely sensed the danger, but he had no real choice. Perhaps a faint hope still lingered within him, that he could negotiate, explain, find a way out. That hope led him straight into the trap. He arrived in his black Renault Megane, a car that would later become another piece of evidence in the case. The garage compound was a maze of metal storage units and small workshops, an ideal setting for dark business, tucked away from public view. He was led to an inconspicuous green shipping container, used as both a storage space and makeshift office. When Joseph McKeever stepped inside that container, he took his final steps as a free man. Behind him came Lee Knox, Jamie Grimes, and Anthony Wales. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a chilling final clang, cutting him off from the rest of the world. Inside that cold, confined space, there was no room left for discussion. He was in a cage with his judges and executioners. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Any illusions of a peaceful resolution vanished. He was now completely at their mercy. Behind the sealed doors of the shipping container, hell unfolded. What followed wasn't just a beating in a fit of rage, it was a calculated, cold-blooded act of sadistic torture that lasted for hours. McKeever was tied to a chair, and his tormentors began what they called an interrogation. Their goal was to extract information about the supposed missing drugs and money. The lead enforcer was Anthony Wales, who carried out the violence with chilling efficiency. Every minute inside that sweltering metal box became an eternity of pain and degradation for McKeever. He was systematically beaten, his bones shattered with a heavy metal bar. Later, forensic experts would determine that both of his kneecaps were smashed, his skull fractured in multiple places, and his larynx crushed in an attempt to strangle him. This wasn't just violence, it was a methodical effort to break him entirely, to reduce him to a screaming, bloodied shell of a man who would say anything to make it stop. At some point, drifting in and out of consciousness and consumed by agony, McKeever began to talk. In a desperate attempt to end his torment, he gave them a lead. He told them about a warehouse in Burscough, a small town north of Liverpool. He claimed the site was connected to Doyle and that it might hold enough product to cover the debt. This revelation caused a shift. A flicker of greed replaced the vengeance in his captors' eyes. They decided to verify the tip immediately, but for McKeever it changed nothing. The torture may have stopped, but his fate had already been sealed. He knew too much, and he had endured too much to ever walk away. The story about the warehouse in Burscough, torn from McKeever under torture, brought him only a brief reprieve. But at the same time, it set a new criminal plan into motion. Lee Knox, ever the man of action, decided he and Anthony Wales would immediately head out to verify the information. However, this created a pressing problem. What to do with the barely alive Joseph McKeever? Leaving him in the container, which had already become a crime scene, was far too risky. They needed a new, safer location to keep him. They chose an unremarkable flat in the densely populated Wyre area on Picton Crescent. One of the gang's junior members, Darren Colosi, had access to the property, making it the ideal temporary hideout. Preparations for transport began, executed with chilling, businesslike efficiency. Jamie Grimes brought over his Citroën Nemo van and carefully lined the cargo area with a large sheet of heavy plastic to avoid leaving evidence. Then, McKeever's mutilated, nearly unconscious body was carried out of the container, wrapped in some kind of material, and loaded into the van. The group split up, working like a well-rehearsed machine. Knox and Wales, fueled by anticipation, sped north along the motorway, chasing the shadow of a missing fortune. Meanwhile, the van carrying McKeever crept through Liverpool's streets toward Wyre. Once there, he was carried into the flat and unceremoniously dumped on the kitchen floor. Two caretakers, Carl Kelly and Darren Colosi, were given strict instructions. Keep the prisoner alive, don't let him die, and wait for Knox's call. Joseph McKeever's life now hung by a thread, entirely dependent on what his tormentors might, or might not, find at that warehouse in Burscough. While life quietly slipped away in the flat on Picton Crescent, another act of this tragedy was playing out in the industrial zone of Burscough. Lee Knox and Anthony Wales spent hours scouring the area, trying to locate the warehouse Joseph McKeever had described. Their search was in vain, no trace of drugs, no sign of James Doyle. With each passing hour, hope turned into frustration, and frustration into seething rage. Convinced that McKeever had been lying to them until the end, they returned to Liverpool, angry, bitter, and empty-handed. When they entered the apartment, they were met with silence. Joseph McKeever was dead. A severe traumatic brain injury had caused massive internal bleeding. His body simply gave out. He died alone on the cold linoleum floor of a stranger's kitchen. Later in court, Knox would claim he tried to resuscitate him, but it was a lie, a feeble attempt to soften the blow of his own guilt. In truth, McKeever's death was nothing more than an inconvenience to them, an unplanned escalation that turned a kidnapping into a murder. And this is where the story takes its most brutal and cynical turn. Weeks later, as the murder investigation was already underway, Merseyside police received a tip-off. It led them to a warehouse in the Swordfish Business Park in Burscough. The location matched exactly what McKeever had described under torture. Inside, behind stacks of solar panels, detectives uncovered a hidden fortune: 155 kilograms of cannabis with a street value of £2.3 million. McKeever had not lied. His final, desperate story was true. He had given them the very lead that could have saved his life and made them rich. But the blind rage and paranoia of his captors had made it impossible for them to believe him. His death wasn't just cruel, it was utterly meaningless. Joseph McKeever's death on the kitchen floor turned a serious problem into a full-blown catastrophe. This was no longer about a debt, it was about murder, and now the group's primary objective became the total elimination of all evidence that could lead police to them. What followed was a large-scale cleanup operation carried out with chilling precision. The top priority was to dispose of the body. McKeever was once again loaded into the van and transported to the same desolate lot off Wyre Road, chosen to serve as an improvised crematorium. The vehicle was doused in accelerant and set ablaze. The killers hoped the intense fire would not only reduce the body to an unrecognizable state, but also destroy any forensic evidence that might remain. But one fire wasn't enough. Every thread linking them to the crime had to be severed. McKeever's black Renault Megane, which had been left near the garage, was driven to another remote location and torched. The third vehicle, the Citroën van used by Jamie Grimes to transport McKeever, met the same fate, set ablaze in a separate part of the city. 3 separate fires in different areas of Liverpool, all in one night. This was their strategy to sow confusion and eliminate the physical traces of the crime. They moved like a professional cleanup crew, trying to erase not only the man, but every object and place connected to his final hours. Their aim was complete erasure, from memory, from records, from the physical world. But in orchestrating such a dramatic and large-scale cover-up, they overlooked a critical truth. The more you try to hide, the more traces you tend to leave behind. Instead of misleading investigators, they lit 3 flaming beacons across the city, smoking unmistakable signals that something extraordinary, something terrible had just happened. The criminals believed the fire had destroyed everything, but they underestimated the power of modern forensics and the persistence of seasoned investigators. The investigation, led by Merseyside police, became a textbook example of how truth can rise from ashes and microscopic traces. Though the body inside the van was badly burned, forensic experts were able to recover enough DNA to match it against the national database of missing persons. The result, a confirmed identification: Joseph McKeever. This was the first major breakthrough. Analysis of McKeever's mobile phone data revealed that its last recorded signal came from the Wavertree area, specifically Picton Crescent. That immediately directed detectives to the apartment-turned-prison where McKeever had been held. The flat turned out to be a goldmine for forensic investigators. Despite attempts to clean it, chemical reagents revealed numerous traces of blood, but the real golden ticket for the prosecution came from an act of carelessness. Anthony Wales had used the bathroom and left a biological trace on the flush button. A single skin cell, one microscopic sample of DNA, became irrefutable proof of his presence at the scene of the murder. Meanwhile, investigators also turned their attention to the garage compound. Jamie Grimes believed he had covered his tracks by deleting CCTV footage, but digital forensics experts were able to recover the erased files. The footage clearly showed McKeever walking into the shipping container, accompanied by Knox, Grimes, and Wales. He never came out. The investigation, like a jigsaw puzzle assembled from thousands of scattered pieces, was painstaking and meticulous. But with each fragment, the picture became clearer and more horrifying. Once the mosaic of evidence formed a clear and damning picture, Merseyside police moved into action. The next phase of the operation began: arrests. The net cast around the criminal group began to tighten, slowly and relentlessly. The first to fall were the lower-level operatives. In a series of coordinated raids, Carl Kelly and Darren Colosi, the guards from the Wavertree flat, were arrested, along with Dylan Owen, who had assisted in disposing of the vehicles. Their attempts to feign ignorance and deny involvement were swiftly dismantled by the weight of forensic and digital evidence. Then came the takedown of the central players. In August 2017, Anthony Wales was arrested. During questioning, he maintained complete silence, but his DNA spoke louder than any denial. Jamie Grimes had shown more foresight. Immediately after the murder, he fled to Spain, hoping to disappear into the criminal underworld of the Costa del Sol. But his name had already been flagged on Interpol's wanted list. He was soon located and arrested by Spanish police during a joint operation, then extradited back to the UK to face justice. The most elusive target was Lee Knox, the mastermind, the leader, the architect of the entire operation. He had seemingly vanished into thin air. His manhunt turned into a drawn-out, methodical search involving intelligence agencies and international coordination. For nearly 3 years, he managed to stay hidden, living under a false identity, Oliver Kennedy, in Belfast, Northern Ireland. He changed his appearance, adopted a new lifestyle, and convinced himself of his invincibility. But in April 2020, that illusion crumbled. Knox was located, identified, and arrested. The entire hierarchy of fear, from the foot soldiers to the kingpin, was now behind bars, awaiting their day in court. The final act of this grim drama unfolded within the walls of Liverpool Crown Court. Across several trials, the prosecution methodically laid out its case to the jury, presenting a mountain of evidence from chilling CCTV footage to irrefutable forensic reports. The full chronology was reconstructed in precise detail, from the moment the drugs vanished to the calculated and brutal attempts to cover up a savage murder. The verdicts delivered were as just as they were severe. Jamie Grimes, the young man whose greed helped ignite the chain of events, was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. Anthony Wales, the ruthless enforcer, received a life sentence with a minimum of 24 years. Carl Kelly and Darren Colosi, whose passivity and silence in the Wavertree flat enabled the crime to take its final toll, were convicted of manslaughter. They were sentenced to 22 and 12 years, respectively. The last to hear his fate was Lee Knox. In delivering the sentence, the judge described the killing as a planned and prolonged act of torture, driven by greed. The ringleader was handed the harshest punishment of all, life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. And so a grim chapter closed, an account of betrayal, greed, and inhuman cruelty. Justice, though delayed, caught up with every perpetrator, proving once more that even the most carefully orchestrated crimes leave traces, and that for every life taken, a reckoning must one day come.